Welcome to Shadow Fable. Tonight, we invite you into the depths of a forgotten past, a place where silence is never truly empty. If you enjoy chilling tales of suspense and the unknown, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more stories to fall asleep to. Though you might not sleep so soundly after this one. There are places in this world that remember, even when the walls crumble, the floors rot, and the windows gape like vacant eyes. They remember. They hold on to whispers, onto echoes, and sometimes they whisper back. It began with an old key. Dr. Peter Calloway found it in the bottom of a file cabinet in the archives of Briarwood University. It was unremarkable, rusting at the edges, its once golden surface tarnished with age. Attached to it was a faded tag, the ink nearly illegible, but just clear enough to read St. Vincent's Hospital, sublevel. That name stirred something in him, a distant familiarity he couldn't quite place. St. Vincent's, one of those institutions lost to time, shuttered decades ago when psychiatric practices shifted away from the dark, experimental corridors of the past. Peter had heard of it in passing, buried in discussions of unethical medical history, but he never expected to hold a tangible piece of it in his hand. A key, after all these years. What were the chances? It should have been locked away, discarded when the hospital was decommissioned. And yet, here it was, untouched, waiting. Curiosity is a strange thing. It whispers, nudges. It opens doors that should remain closed. That night, after finishing his research at the university, Peter drove out to the ruins of St. Vincent's. The asylum lay at the edge of town, swallowed by dense woods that had reclaimed much of the land. Most people avoided it, dismissing it as an eyesore, a husk of something best forgotten. The entrance gates were rusted open, leaning like broken ribs, the sign above them barely clinging to its frame. He stepped out of his car, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. The wind moved through the trees, but the building stood unnaturally still, watching. Peter wasn't superstitious. He believed in history, in records, in documented truth. What he did not believe in was ghosts. And yet, something about the asylum's silhouette made his pulse quicken. The main hall had long since been gutted by time. Moonlight spilled through shattered windows, casting warped shadows along the floor. Old wheelchairs sat abandoned in corners, their wheels frozen with rust. The walls were a peeling mosaic of pastels and grime, the echoes of a sterile world reduced to ruin. He moved carefully, his footsteps muted against the debris-covered floor. The silence here was thick, pressing. It filled his ears, his throat. Then he saw it. A door, metal, reinforced. Unlike the others, it hadn't been forced open or left to decay. This one remained sealed, untouched by time, waiting. Peter reached into his pocket and pulled out the key. His fingers hesitated just briefly before he slid it into the lock. A click. The door groaned open. Beyond it, stairs spiraled downward into the dark. He hesitated. The air beyond the threshold was colder, thick with the scent of damp concrete and something stale, something untouched by fresh air for decades. His breath curled in the dim light as he peered down the stairs. Peter wasn't sure what he expected to find. Records, perhaps. Forgotten equipment. The remains of some long-abandoned experiment. But as he stood there, the key still warm in his hand, he felt something else. Something deeper than curiosity. A pull. The stairwell swallowed sound. His own breathing felt distant as he descended, the scuff of his shoes against stone dull and uneven. The deeper he went, the more the air pressed in around him, heavy, expectant. At the bottom, another door, no lock this time, just rusted hinges, and a push handle. He reached out, fingers grazing the metal, when a sound made him freeze. A whisper, indistinct, just beyond the threshold. Peter swallowed hard. It had to be the wind, funneled through some unseen passage. The rational part of him clung to that explanation as he pressed against the door and pushed it open. The room beyond was vast, stretching into darkness. His flashlight cut through the void, revealing the husks of examination tables, rusting gurneys, cabinets filled with yellowed papers. A row of chairs lined one wall, their seats torn open as if something had clawed at them. But it was the writing that made his stomach tighten. Scrawled along the far wall in jagged, erratic strokes, "They never left." Peter's pulse pounded. He turned, scanning the space, his breath shallow. A file lay open on a nearby desk, its pages warped with time. He reached for it, the paper brittle beneath his fingers. Patient record, St. Vincent's experimental ward. The name at the top made his blood run cold. Calloway, Robert. Peter's father. A man who had died before Peter was old enough to remember him. The room seemed to contract around him, the silence shifting, thickening. He flipped through the pages, scanning the faded notes. Electroshock therapy, induced sleep treatments, anomalous behavior, increasing paranoia. His father had been here, not as a doctor, as a patient. A sharp noise broke the silence, not a creak, not the groan of an old building settling. A breath, right behind him. Peter whirled around, his flashlight cutting jagged arcs through the darkness. Nothing. The room remained as it was, abandoned, silent, filled with the decayed remnants of a forgotten era. But the air felt different now, charged with something unseen, something just beyond the reach of his light. His fingers clenched around the file. His father had been here. That fact alone sent ice crawling up his spine. He had spent his entire life believing Robert Calloway had died in an accident, a quiet, unremarkable end. But this place, this was no accident. He turned back to the file, his breath quick and shallow. The last few pages were barely legible, the ink smudged, but one phrase stood out among the clinical notations. Subject exhibits heightened sensitivity to auditory hallucinations, claims to hear voices from beyond the walls, increasing distress, administering final treatment on. The date was missing. The page torn at the bottom. A whisper drifted through the room. Peter stiffened. This time, it was unmistakable. Not the wind, not the settling of the building. A voice, low and distant, threading through the silence. It came from deeper within the sublevel. Peter swallowed hard, the rational part of his mind screaming for him to leave, to lock the door behind him and never return. But something inside him, something older than reason, kept him rooted in place. He stepped forward. The hallway beyond was narrower, the ceiling lower. His flashlight flickered against rusting pipes, exposed wiring, peeling paint. He followed the corridor, his breath shallow, the weight of the file pressing against his chest like a heartbeat. A door stood slightly ajar at the end of the hall. Beyond it, a room. A single chair sat in the center, leather straps still fastened to its arms. The walls were covered in jagged scratches, deep and desperate. The overhead light flickered weakly, casting warped shadows along the floor. But it was the figure in the corner that made Peter's blood run cold. A man slumped against the wall, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. His clothes were faded, old, his hands skeletal, his face. Peter's breath hitched. He knew that face. even with the skin stretched tight over bone, even with the hollowed-out sockets where eyes should have been, he knew it was his father. And then the body moved. A slow, shuddering breath. The empty sockets turned toward him, and in a voice that was impossibly familiar, impossibly wrong, it whispered, "Peter, you finally came back." Peter's breath caught in his throat. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to bolt up the stairs and leave this place buried in the past where it belonged. But he couldn't move. The thing, his father, or what remained of him, shifted against the wall, joints cracking, the weight of years pressing against every slow, unnatural movement. The whisper, that voice, his father's voice, sent a tremor through Peter's bones, awakening something deep, something he had locked away long ago. "Peter, you finally came back." Number. This wasn't real, this was some trick of the mind, the product of too many hours spent digging through history, breathing in the dust of forgotten places. And yet, the body moved. Peter staggered backward, his flashlight shaking in his grip. You can't be real." The figure exhaled a slow, rattling breath. "They said you wouldn't return, but I knew better. I always knew you'd follow the echoes." Peter's fingers tightened around the file, its brittle pages curling in his grasp. This isn't possible. You died when I was a child." A long pause. Then, in a voice softer now, something laced with something almost mournful. "Did I?" The words sent a chill through Peter's spine. He forced himself to look, really look, at the figure before him. The remains of his father, or something wearing his father's face, sat unnaturally still, the gaunt, skeletal frame pressing against the peeling wall as if it had been waiting there for an eternity. Peter's mind raced. His father had been here, confined within these walls, subjected to whatever unspeakable experiment St. Vincent's had buried beneath its foundation. But had he ever left? The thought made his skin crawl. "I don't understand," Peter whispered, shaking his head. My mother told me. She said you were gone. An accident. A fire." His father, or the thing that was his father, let out a dry, hollow sound, something that might have once been a chuckle. "No accident, Peter. No fire. Just silence. And waiting. Always waiting." Peter took another step back. The walls felt closer now, the air thick, suffocating. The chair in the center of the room, the leather straps, the remnants of restraints, burned into his vision. He had to leave. Had to get out of here before... A sound, sharp and sudden, rang through the corridor behind him. Footsteps, not his, slow, deliberate, approaching. Peter turned, his flashlight casting a trembling beam into the hallway. Empty. But the footsteps continued, growing louder, growing closer. Peter's pulse pounded in his ears. The footsteps, steady, deliberate, were not his own. Yet, as he cast his light down the hallway, there was nothing there, just the peeling walls, the rusting pipes, the darkness stretching beyond the reach of his beam. And then they stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Peter swallowed hard, his throat dry. He turned back toward the thing in the corner, the thing that bore his father's face, only to find that it had moved. It was no longer slumped against the wall. It was standing, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its hollow sockets fixed on Peter with something that felt more like recognition than sight. The skin around its mouth cracked as it spoke, the words leaking out in a whisper that was impossibly close now. "You're not supposed to be here." Peter stumbled back, nearly tripping over the file cabinet at his side. The air in the room had thickened, pressing against him like unseen hands. He needed to leave. Now, his fingers fumbled with the flashlight, his grip slick with sweat. He turned toward the hallway, ready to run, but before he could take a step, the footsteps returned. But this time, they were running, coming straight toward him. Peter spun, bracing himself for something, anything, emerging from the shadows. But as the sound reached him, as the pounding footsteps closed the distance, there was nothing. Nothing at all. Just the rush of air, a whisper of movement. And then, the door at the end of the hall slammed shut. Peter jolted, his breath ragged. He was trapped. Behind him, the figure in the room took a step closer. "They don't like visitors," it whispered. Peter clenched his jaw, fighting the wave of panic threatening to claw its way up his throat. Think. This place, this asylum, it wasn't abandoned. Not completely. Not in the way he'd thought. He turned back to the figure, his voice low, shaking. "Who's here?" The thing that was his father let out a slow, rattling exhale. "Everyone who never left." A cold dread settled in Peter's chest. He looked at the walls again, the scratches, the writing, the chair with its worn leather restraints. The layers of history pressed against him, closing in. And then he heard it. Not footsteps, not whispers. A voice, software distant, echoing through the walls, calling his name. "Peter?" Peter's breath hitched. The voice, soft, distant, curled through the darkness like a thread pulling him deeper. Peter. It was wrong. Not just in its presence, but in its tone. It wasn't pleading, it wasn't calling for help, it was expectant. His grip on the flashlight tightened. His rational mind, the one that had carried him through years of academic study and historical research, told him to leave. That none of this was real. That it was the wind, the shifting of old pipes, the product of an overactive imagination. But the rest of him, the part that felt the air thickening, the temperature dropping, the unmistakable weight of watching eyes, knew better. "They know you're here now," the figure in the room whispered. Peter didn't dare look back. He forced himself to move, stepping toward the heavy door that had slammed shut behind him. His fingers trembled as he reached for the handle. It was ice cold beneath his touch. Locked. Of course it was. His heartbeat thundered in his ears as he turned back toward the corridor. The voice, whatever it was, had fallen silent. But the air had changed. The shadows along the walls were wrong. They stretched in unnatural ways. Too long, too fluid, like ink bleeding across the floor. And somewhere, beneath the oppressive silence, was a sound so faint he almost missed it. Breathing. Not his own, deep, shallow. As though many somethings, were just out of sight, waiting for him to take one more step. Peter took a shaky breath and did the only thing he could. He ran. His feet pounded against the floor as he tore down the corridor, dodging overturned gurneys, rusted medical carts, the skeletal remains of a past that refused to die. He didn't look back, didn't dare. The hallway twisted, turning left, then right, a maze of shadows and crumbling walls. His lungs burned, but he pushed forward, his mind screaming for an exit, a door, anything. Then, a flicker. Just ahead, past a rusted door hanging from its hinges, he saw it. A stairwell. The same one he had descended. Relief flooded through him, until he realized the whispers had returned. Only now, They were coming from above. "You can't leave, Peter." He skidded to a stop, breath ragged. There, at the top of the stairs, was a figure. Tall, unmoving, watching. And as his flashlight beam flickered across it, illuminating a face stretched in something almost like a smile. The lights cut out. Darkness swallowed everything. Peter froze. His own breath felt deafening in the sudden void, his heartbeat hammering against his ribs. The air pressed in around him, thick and unmoving, as if the very walls of the asylum had exhaled, holding their breath along with him. Then, a sound, soft, deliberate. A step, coming down the stairs. Peter fumbled with the flashlight, his fingers clumsy and numb with fear. The beam flickered weakly, sputtering against the blackness, but it was too late. He had already heard it. Another step, and another. Slow, measured. The figure was descending. Peter's body locked up, every instinct warring between fight and flight. His mind screamed at him to run, but his legs felt rooted in place, as if the asylum itself had its fingers wrapped around his ankles. Then, just as suddenly as the light had died, his flashlight flared back to life. The beam caught the stairs, illuminating the space where the figure had been. But the steps were empty. His breath hitched, his skin cold with something beyond fear. He swept the light frantically around, searching, but there was nothing. Just the yawning stairwell leading back to the main floor. Had he imagined it? Number? He had heard it, felt it. Something had been there, and now it wasn't. The whispering had stopped. The air was still. Too still. Peter swallowed hard, forcing his feet to move. His body screamed in protest, but he pushed himself forward, taking the steps two at a time, desperate to get out of this place, to leave it behind. A hand closed around his ankle. Cold, clammy, not human. Peter didn't think. He kicked, wrenching free, his flashlight swinging wildly as he scrambled up the stairs. The beam caught something for the briefest second. A hand, too long, too thin, retreating into the darkness below. He didn't look back, didn't want to see what it belonged to. The main floor was just ahead. If he could reach the doors, if he could get outside, a new voice, right at his ear. "Stay!" Peter lunged through the threshold, crashing onto the asylum's main floor. The moment his feet hit the ground, the door behind him slammed shut, the force rattling the walls. He spun around, panting, his flashlight beam shaking against the door. It was solid, heavy, and locked. He had made it out. But as he stood there, heart pounding, something new settled into his bones. A realization. The whispering had stopped because it didn't need to call him anymore. The asylum had already let him in. And now it knew him. It had been waiting, and it would wait again, because Peter Calloway had left St. Vincent's. But St. Vincent's had never left him. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to subscribe to Shadow Fable for more eerie tales that stay with you long after the lights go out. Sleep well, if you can,